Grandpa, tonight, my parents are going to make you sleep forever. That is what my 7-year-old granddaughter Zuri whispered to me in the middle of my 72nd birthday party. I did not gasp, and I did not cry. I simply clutched my chest, faked a massive heart attack, and escaped through a bathroom window, while my ungrateful daughter and her husband waited for their crooked doctor to arrive with a lethal injection. By the time the sun came up, they would find their bank accounts frozen, their credit cards declined, and their mansion surrounded by a fleet of 18-wheelers. But before I tell you how I brought my own empire crashing down on their heads, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that betrayal should always have a price. My name is Clarence Jefferson, and I have spent 50 years hauling everything from steel beams to medical supplies across every highway in America. I built Jefferson Logistics from a single rusted pickup truck into a multi-million-dollar empire. I know the smell of burning brakes, and I know the look of a liar. As I stood in the center of the ballroom in my own house holding a crystal flute of champagne, I looked at my son-in-law Justin. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my first house. He raised his glass to toast me, flashing that bright salesman smile that never quite reached his eyes. To Clarence, he announced, his voice booming over the expensive sound system. A living legend, a pioneer, the rock of this family. The guests applauded. My daughter Keisha beamed, clutching Justin's arm like a trophy. But I was not looking at their smiles. I was looking at the bottle of champagne sitting on the table behind them. It was a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon, or at least the label said it was. I took a sip from my glass. The liquid was acidic, sharp, and tasted like vinegar. It was $5 gas station sparkling wine poured into an expensive bottle. Justin thought I was too old and too unrefined to know the difference. He thought the old black truck driver wouldn't know what real quality tasted like. That was his first mistake. I watched him over the rim of my glass. He wasn't looking at me with admiration. He was checking his watch every 30 seconds. He was tapping his foot. He was sweating even though the air conditioning was set to 68 degrees. I knew that sweat. I had seen it on drivers who were running illegal cargo. It was the sweat of a man who owes dangerous people a lot of money and has run out of time. I looked at Keisha. She was busy showing off a diamond necklace to her friends, completely ignoring the fact that her husband looked like he was about to vomit from anxiety. She had grown up with everything I never had, and it had made her soft. It had made her blind. She didn't see the desperation in her husband's eyes. She only saw the inheritance she thought was coming her way. I felt a small tug on the hem of my suit jacket. I looked down. It was Zuri, my granddaughter. She was the only pure thing in this house. She had my eyes and my late wife Odessa's spirit. She looked terrified. She wasn't playing with the other children. She was clutching her favorite stuffed bear so hard her knuckles were white. I knelt down, ignoring the stiffness in my knees. "Hey there, little bit," I said, trying to keep my voice warm despite the cold anger growing in my stomach. "Are you having fun?" Zuri shook her head. She looked around to make sure her parents weren't watching. They were too busy accepting compliments from people they didn't like. Zuri leaned in close to my ear. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you have to leave. Mommy and Daddy said that after you blow out the candles, Dr. Hoffman is coming. They said he is going to give you a special shot to make you sleep forever so they can get your signature on the papers." My heart actually skipped a beat. The room seemed to tilt. Dr. Hoffman. I knew that name. He was a disgraced physician who had lost his license years ago for overprescribing opioids and falsifying death certificates. He was a ghost who did dirty work for people who wanted problems to disappear. If Justin and Keisha had called Hoffman, this wasn't a birthday party. It was an execution. They didn't just want my money. They wanted me gone tonight. They wanted to drug me, force my hand to sign over the company and the estate, and then stop my heart. I looked at Zuri. I wanted to grab her and run out the front door right then and there, but I saw the security guards by the entrance. They weren't my usual guys. They were new faces, big men with cold eyes hired by Justin for this specific event. If I tried to walk out with Zuri, they would stop me. They would say I was confused, senile, having an episode. They would drag me upstairs and Hoffman would be waiting. I needed a plan. I needed to be smarter than them. I needed to use their own prejudices against them. They thought I was a frail, sick old man. I would give them exactly what they expected. I stood up, swaying slightly on purpose. I let the champagne glass slip from my fingers. It shattered loudly on the marble floor. The sound cut through the chatter of the party. I grabbed my chest with both hands and let out a low, guttural groan. Grandpa Zuri cried out, playing her part perfectly without even knowing it. Justin's head snapped toward me. For a second, I saw pure relief on his face. He thought nature was doing the work for him. Dad Keisha screamed, rushing over her heels, clicking frantically on the floor. I collapsed onto the floor, making sure to land safely but dramatically. I gasped for air, fluttering my eyelids. "Help him!" Someone call 911, a guest shouted. "No," Justin yelled too quickly, too loudly. He stepped forward, waving his hands. "No ambulance. He hates hospitals. We have a private doctor on the way. Dr. Hoffman is already en route. Let's just get him to the private study to rest. He just needs to lie down." I let them lift me. Justin and one of his hired goons carried me into the study on the first floor. It was the room where I kept my safe, the room where I had built my empire. They laid me down on the leather sofa. Justin loomed over me, his face a mask of fake concern. "Just rest, Clarence," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The doctor will be here soon to make all the pain go away." He patted my shoulder, and I felt his hand shaking. He ushered Keisha out of the room. "Stay here, Mom," he told her outside the door. "I'll go wait for Hoffman at the gate. Don't let anyone in." The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut, my eyes snapped open. The act was over. I wasn't frail. I wasn't dying. I was a man who had fought off hijackers in the 70s with a tire iron. I sat up and moved silently to the door. I locked it from the inside. Then I dragged a heavy armchair in front of it. That would buy me 2 minutes when they tried to get in. I went to the large window that overlooked the back garden. I unlatched it and slid it up. The night air hit my face, cool and sharp. I climbed out, my movements steady and sure. I dropped into the flower bed, ruining my expensive shoes, but I didn't care. I kept low, moving through the shadows of the hedges I had planted myself 20 years ago. I headed toward the garage, but not the main bay where my Rolls-Royce Phantom was parked. Justin had insisted on having that car detailed yesterday. I knew he had probably placed a GPS tracker on it, or worse, cut the brake lines. I ran past the luxury cars to the old detached shed at the edge of the property. Inside sat old Betsy, my 1985 Ford F-150. The paint was peeling. The upholstery was torn, and Keisha hated it. She had begged me to send it to the junkyard a dozen times. She said it was an eyesore. She said it embarrassed her. But I kept it. I kept the engine oiled and the battery charged. I kept it because it was the only thing in this life that had never lied to me. I pulled the spare key from the magnetic box I kept hidden inside the wheel well. I climbed into the cab. It smelled like old leather and hard work. I pumped the gas pedal twice and turned the key. The engine coughed once, then roared to life with a sound that was music to my ears. I didn't turn on the headlights. I didn't want them to see me leaving. I threw the truck into gear and drove across the grass, bypassing the main driveway and the security gate. I drove right through the wooden fence at the back of the property, the old wood splintering like matchsticks against the steel bumper of my truck. I hit the back road and floored it. I checked the rearview mirror. No one was following me yet. They were still inside, waiting for their killer doctor to arrive, thinking I was helpless on the sofa. They thought they had won. They thought the night was going to end with a funeral. But they were wrong. The night was just beginning, and I was heading to the one place they would never think to look. I was going to war, and I was going to bring the whole world down on top of them. I pulled old Betsy into the loading bay of the industrial warehouse on the south side of town. The metal door rolled down with a screech that sounded like a dying hawk sealing me inside my own fortress. This building was the first property I ever bought with my own money back when banks would not even look at a man with my skin color unless he was holding a broom. Now it was my sanctuary. I climbed the metal stairs to the foreman's office overlooking the empty floor. I did not turn on the main lights. I worked by the glow of the street lamps filtering through the high, dirty windows. I unlocked the steel cabinet in the corner and powered up the server rack I had installed 6 months ago. My son-in-law Justin thought he was the only one who knew about technology, but he forgot that logistics is all about surveillance. I had cameras in every room of my mansion, not to spy on my family, but to watch the staff. Tonight, however, the show was much more personal. The bank of monitors flickered to life. The feed was high definition and crystal clear. I saw the library where I had just faked my heart attack. The window was still open and the curtains were blowing in the night wind. Justin was pacing back and forth like a caged animal. His tuxedo jacket was thrown on the floor and his tie was undone. Keisha was sitting on the leather sofa, sobbing with her face in her hands. She looked small and broken. I watched as Justin stopped pacing and marched over to her. He grabbed her by the shoulders and hauled her to her feet. "Where did he go, Keisha?" he screamed. His face was twisted and ugly. "A man having a heart attack does not just vanish into thin air. You were supposed to be watching the door." I leaned closer to the screen, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. Keisha tried to pull away, but Justin held tight. "I do not know." "Justin," she cried. I turned my back for 1 second to get water. Maybe he crawled out. Maybe he is in the garden. Justin did not want to hear excuses. He pulled back his hand and slapped her across the face. The sound was tinny through the speakers, but the impact was undeniable. Keisha stumbled back, falling onto the sofa. My blood boiled. I had never laid a hand on my daughter in her life. I had spoiled her and I had protected her, and now I was watching a mediocre man beat her in my own house. "You and your whole family are useless," Justin spat at her. He wiped his hand on his pants as if touching her had made him dirty. "I should have known better than to marry into this trash. You think money changes what you are. It does not. You are just incompetent people playing dress-up in a big house." The racial slur hung in the air, unsaid, but loud and clear. I saw the way he looked at her with pure, unadulterated hatred. He did not love her. He did not even like her. He despised her heritage, and he despised her father, but he surely loved our bank accounts. "Get up and find him," Justin ordered. "If we do not find him and finish this tonight, we lose everything." I sat back in my chair in the dark office. The smell of the warehouse hit me. It was a mix of diesel fumes, old cardboard, and dust. It was the smell of my history. While Justin was running around my mansion terrified of losing his easy life, I remembered why I kept this place. I looked at the corner of the office where a rusty cot still sat against the wall. I walked over to it and ran my hand along the cold steel frame. 40 years ago, I spent 3 nights lying on that cot with a 12-gauge shotgun across my chest. It was 1974 and I had just won a contract to haul steel for the city. The local competitors did not like that. They wore white hoods and burned a cross on my loading dock. They told me if I drove my trucks, they would burn this building to the ground with me inside. I did not run then, and I was not going to run now. I stayed in this office for 72 hours straight, waiting for them to come through that door. They never did. They were cowards who relied on fear. Justin was no different. He was just a man in a different kind of costume. Instead of a white sheet, he wore a designer suit. Instead of a torch, he used a syringe and a fountain pen. I survived the Klan, and I survived the recession, and I survived the death of my beloved Odessa. This boy thought he could intimidate me. He thought he could take what I built with blood and sweat. He was about to learn that the old man he underestimated was forged in a fire he could not even imagine. I went back to the desk and unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside was a burner phone I kept for emergencies. I had not used it in years, but I kept it charged. I dialed a number from memory. It was the direct private line to Mr. Henderson, the regional president of the bank where I kept the company's operational funds and my personal liquid assets. Henderson was an old-school banker. We played golf twice a year. He answered on the second ring, even though it was past 10 at night. "Clarence, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Code red." "Arthur." I said, my voice flat and hard. "I need you to execute Code Red immediately on all accounts connected to the Jefferson estate and the subsidiary cards held by Justin and Keisha." There was a pause on the line. Arthur Henderson woke up instantly. Code Red meant total lockdown. It meant fraud alerts. It meant freezing assets under suspicion of criminal activity. It was a protocol we established 10 years ago when cyber theft started becoming a threat. "Are you sure?" Clarence Arthur asked. "This will freeze everything. Corporate cards, personal checking, the lines of credit. It will trigger a federal flag." "Do it," I said. "Not a penny moves, not a dime. Cut them off at the knees, Arthur. I want them to feel the winter cold." "Done," Arthur said. "I am logging into the mainframe now. Give me 2 minutes." I hung up and turned my attention back to the monitors. Justin had left the study. I switched camera views until I found him in the kitchen. He was pacing again, holding his smartphone. He looked manic. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to move money. He was trying to transfer funds to an offshore crypto wallet to pay the debts he owed to people who broke legs for a living. I watched him tapping furiously on the screen. He paused, waiting for the transaction to clear. I counted down in my head. 3, 2, 1. Justin stopped. He stared at the phone. He He tapped the screen again harder this time, then he started shaking it as if the device was the problem. Transaction declined, access denied, account frozen. I could almost see the red letters flashing on his screen. He let out a scream that the microphone picked up clearly. It was a primal sound of pure terror. He smashed the phone onto the granite countertop, shattering the screen. He swept a row of expensive wine glasses onto the floor, sending shards of crystal flying everywhere. He gripped the edge of the counter, breathing hard, his face pale and sweaty. He knew, in that moment, he knew. The heart attack was fake. The old man was gone. And the money, the glorious, endless river of money he had married into, had just dried up. He looked up at the ceiling almost as if he knew I was watching. His eyes were wide with panic. He had promised someone $5 million by morning. He had bet his life on my death. Now I was alive and he was broke. I leaned into the microphone on my desk, even though he could not hear me. "Welcome to the war, son," I whispered. "You wanted my life. Now you have to fight for yours." I turned off the monitor, but I did not smile. This was not a victory. This was just the opening shot. And tomorrow I was going to take everything else he had left. The morning sun rose over the city, bringing a light that burned rather than warmed. I sat in my steel chair in the warehouse, watching the monitors with a cup of black coffee that tasted like gasoline and victory. My daughter Keisha walked into the L'Etoile Spa at 9 in the morning, wearing sunglasses big enough to hide her shame if she had any. She did not know I was alive, and she did not know I was watching. She demanded the platinum package, which cost more than my drivers made in a week. She lay back on the table, expecting the world to serve her as it always had. But when the receptionist swiped her black card, the machine let out a low beep that sounded like a judge's gavel. "Try it again." Keisha snapped, her voice dripping with entitlement. "It is a black card. It does not get declined." The receptionist tried again. Then she tried a second card, then a third. The line behind Keisha began to grow. Women in yoga pants began to whisper. The manager, a woman Keisha had terrorized for years, walked over with a smile that was sharp as a razor. "I am sorry, Mrs. Mason," the manager said loud enough for everyone to hear. "The bank has flagged all your accounts for suspicious activity and insufficient funds. Please leave my establishment before I call the police for attempted theft of services." Keisha turned red, then purple. She screamed. She threatened to sue, but 2 security guards escorted her out to the curb where her car was waiting. She tried to open the door, but it was locked. The repo man was already hooking it up to the tow truck. She stood there on the sidewalk in her expensive robe, screaming at the sky while bystanders filmed her for social media. Across town, Justin was having a much worse morning. He was stopped at a red light in his Porsche, beating the steering wheel in frustration. He had tried 4 ATMs and all of them had eaten his cards. He needed cash to pay the interest on the loan he had taken to buy that very car. A motorcycle pulled up beside him. The rider did not look at the road. He looked at Justin. He knocked on the window with a gloved hand. Justin rolled it down, thinking it was someone admiring the car. The rider leaned in. His helmet visor was black, but his voice was clear. "Mr. Varga is not a patient man, Justin. You said the old man would be dead by sunrise. The old man is gone, but the money is locked. You have until midnight. If you do not pay, we do not take the car. We take a finger for every $10,000. The light turned green. The rider sped off. Justin sat there paralyzed as horns honked behind him. He looked at his hands, counting his fingers, realizing he did not have enough of them to pay his debt. Desperation makes people stupid, and Justin was already halfway there. He picked up Keisha from the curb, and they drove straight to the headquarters of Jefferson Logistics. They stormed into the lobby like they owned the building. They marched past the reception desk, ignoring the security guards. They burst into the executive suite looking for the chief financial officer. "We need an immediate wire transfer," Justin shouted, his face slick with sweat. "Override the bank freeze. My father-in-law authorized it before he went missing. It is an emergency." The staff stared at him. They knew Justin. They hated Justin. He had fired 3 secretaries in a month because they did not bring his coffee fast enough. The door to my office opened, but it was not the CFO who walked out. It was Reginald Banks. Reggie. We grew up on the same block. We fought in the same unit overseas. He went to law school at night while I drove trucks during the day. He was now the most feared corporate attorney in the state and the only man I trusted with my life. He was wearing a 3-piece suit that cost more than Justin's car, and he looked at my son-in-law like he was something he had scraped off his shoe. "Mr. Mason," Reggie said, his voice deep and calm. "You are trespassing. Get out." Justin laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "Trespassing. I am the heir to this company. Clarence is gone. I am in charge. Cut the check, Reggie, or you are fired too. Reggie did not blink. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He dropped it on the desk. It landed with a heavy finality. Clarence Jefferson retired effectively at midnight last night, Reggie said. He triggered the succession clause. All assets, including Jefferson Logistics and the estate, have been transferred into an irrevocable trust. The sole beneficiary is Zuri Jefferson. The trustee is the board of directors, and I am the chairman of that board. Justin picked up the paper, his hands shaking so hard he ripped the corner. This is fake, he screamed. He was fine yesterday. He was going to sign it over to us. Reggie stepped forward, invading Justin's personal space. He leaned down and whispered something that made Justin step back. You are not an heir, Justin. You are a liability. Your security clearance is revoked, your company credit cards are canceled, and effective immediately you are fired from your consultant position. Security removed this trash from my building. Two large men stepped forward. They were not the polite corporate security guards. They were my old driver's men with scars and grease under their fingernails, men who knew exactly what Justin was. They grabbed him by the arms. Wait, Justin screamed, struggling against their grip. You cannot do this. You do not understand. I need access to the liquid assets. I need the deed to the house. Reggie paused and raised an eyebrow. The house. Why do you need the deed to the house, Justin? It is a family residence. It has no commercial value unless you are trying to sell it. Justin stopped fighting. His eyes darted around the room, wild and terrified. He realized he had said too much, but the fear of the man on the motorcycle was stronger than his fear of Reggie. I mortgaged it, Justin blurted out. The silence in the room was absolute. Keisha gasped, covering her mouth. You did what she whispered. I forged the signature. Justin yelled, tears streaming down his face. I used the mansion as collateral for a hard money loan from the Bratva. I owe them $5 million. If I do not pay them by midnight, they are going to take the house. They are going to burn it down with us inside. I sat in the dark warehouse and felt my blood turn to ice. My fist clenched so hard my knuckles cracked. The mansion. It was not just a house. It was the home I built for Odessa. It was where we raised Keisha. It was where Odessa took her last breath holding my hand. Every brick was a memory. Every room was a shrine to the woman who had saved me. And this mediocre, greedy coward had pawned it off to Russian mobsters to pay for his gambling addiction. He had forged my name. He had sold my memories. Reggie looked at Justin with a mixture of disgust and pity. You forged a federal document and engaged in mortgage fraud involving organized crime, Reggie said. That is 20 years in prison, Justin. But you will not make it to prison. The Russians do not foreclose with paperwork. They foreclose with fire. Get him out of here. The guards dragged Justin and Keisha toward the elevators. Justin was sobbing, begging for help, begging for a loan, begging for mercy. I watched them on the monitor until they were thrown out onto the street. I looked at the image of my office where Reggie was now standing by the window looking out at the city. He knew I was watching. He tapped his watch. The clock was ticking. Justin had 12 hours before the mob came for my home. I stood up and kicked the metal chair across the room. It clattered against the wall, echoing in the empty warehouse. Justin thought he had hit rock bottom. He was wrong. He had just handed me the weapon I needed to destroy him completely. He had threatened Odessa's house, and for that, there would be no mercy. I reached for the burner phone again. It was time to make a call to some people who made the Russians look like choir boys. It was time to call the truckers. I watched the monitors in my warehouse command center with a coldness that frightened even me. Justin and Keisha had returned to the mansion after being thrown out of my company headquarters. They were humiliated and broke and terrified of the Russian mobsters coming for them at midnight. But a cornered rat does not surrender. A cornered rat bites the smallest thing it can find. And in that house, the smallest thing was my 7-year-old granddaughter Zuri. I saw Justin storm up the grand staircase. He was not walking like a father. He was walking like a warden. He kicked open the door to Zuri's bedroom. She was sitting on her bed holding the iPad she used to message me. She looked up expecting a hug or comfort. Instead, Justin snatched the device from her hand so violently I saw her small body jerk forward. He threw the expensive tablet against the wall, shattering the screen. You are the reason for this, he screamed at her. You and your grandfather conspiring against us. Keisha stood in the doorway watching. My daughter, the woman I had carried on my shoulders. She did not step in. She did not tell him to stop. She just leaned against the door frame, biting her nails, worrying about her spa treatments while her husband terrorized her child. Justin grabbed Zuri by the arm. He dragged her out of her princess-themed bedroom and down the hall to the old linen closet. It was a small, windowless room with a heavy door. "No," Justin Zuri cried. "Please, Daddy, I am scared of the dark." He did not care. He shoved her inside and slammed the door. I heard the distinct click of the deadbolt sliding home. "You stay in there until your grandfather signs the papers," Justin yelled through the wood. "No school, no food, no light. Think about whose side you are on." Then he walked away, leaving my granddaughter alone in pitch blackness. I turned up the audio gain on the hidden microphone I had placed in the hallway lamp. At first there was silence. Then I heard it. A small muffled sob. Then a whimper. "Grandpa." She whispered into the dark. "Grandpa, please come get me." That sound tore through my chest like a hollow point bullet. It hurt more than the death of my wife. It hurt more than the betrayal of my daughter. I had built an empire of steel and diesel to protect that little girl, and now she was a prisoner in the castle I paid for. I slammed my fist onto the metal desk, denting the steel. The game was over. This was no longer a financial dispute. This was a hostage situation. My burner phone rang. It was a video call from an unknown number. I accepted it. Justin's face filled the screen. His eyes were bloodshot and he was sweating profusely. He held the phone up to the door of the linen closet so I could hear Zuri crying in real time. "I know you have cameras, old man," Justin hissed. "I know you are watching. Do you hear her? That is the sound of your legacy rotting in the dark." I stared at his pixelated face and I felt a calm settle over me that was more dangerous than any rage. "What do you want, Justin?" I asked, my voice steady. "I want the power of attorney," Justin said. "I want full unrestricted access to the offshore accounts, and I want you to sign the deed to the house over to me immediately. You have 1 hour. If I do not have those documents signed and notarized by the time the clock strikes 3, I am going to leave her in there, and when the Russians come to burn the house down tonight, I will walk out the back door and leave her inside." He meant it. I looked into his eyes and I saw the abyss. He was so terrified of what he owed the mob that he had lost his humanity. He was willing to sacrifice his own child to save his skin. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, son," I said. "You touched the one thing that was off limits." Justin laughed, a dry cracking sound. "What are you going to do, Clarence? You are a fugitive. You cannot call the cops because I will tell them you kidnapped her first. You have no power. You have 1 hour. Sign the papers or say goodbye." He ended the call. I put the phone down. He was right about one thing. I could not call the police. If SWAT surrounded the house, Justin might panic and use Zuri as a human shield, or the Russians might see the commotion and decide to eliminate everyone to tie up loose ends. I could not risk a stray bullet finding my granddaughter. I needed a surgical strike, but I needed it to hit with the force of a freight train. I stood up and walked to the far corner of the warehouse where a dusty tarp covered a workbench. I pulled the canvas away, revealing a piece of equipment I had not used in 20 years. It was a high-powered CB base station radio with a linear amplifier that could boost the signal across 3 counties. In the age of cell phones and internet, people forgot about the radio waves. They forgot that there was an entire army of men and women who lived on the asphalt, moving the blood of this country through its concrete veins. I flipped the power switch. The amber lights of the vacuum tubes glowed to life. The static hiss filled the quiet warehouse. I grabbed the heavy microphone. It felt familiar in my hand like an old weapon. I keyed the mic. "Breaker 19, this is Road King calling all units," I said, using the handle I had earned 40 years ago when I drove the most dangerous routes in the South. "I am calling on the old guard. I have a code black situation. My family is in danger. I need heavy iron at the Northside estate. Over." There was a moment of silence. Just the crackle of static. Then a voice cut through thick and deep like gravel. "Road King. This is Iron Mike. I thought you were dead or retired. I am 10 miles out with a full load of timber." "What do you need, boss?" Another voice chimed in. "This is Blue Dog. I am parked at the diner on Route 6. I have got my flatbed empty and ready to roll." Then another and another. They were my old drivers, men I had hired when no one else would give them a chance. Men I had bailed out of jail, men whose hospital bills I had paid, men who had eaten Thanksgiving dinner at my table. They were retired or semi-retired, but they still listened to the channel. They were the hardest men God ever put breath into. They had tire irons under their seats and loyalty in their bones. I need a blockade, I told them. I need you to shut down the neighborhood. I need you to surround the house, nobody in, nobody out. And I need you to make enough noise to wake the dead. We are going to bring the walls of Jericho down. Copy that, Road King, Iron Mike said. We are rolling. ETA 15 minutes. Hammer down. I grabbed a pair of bolt cutters and a heavy wrench from the tool wall. I put on my old leather work jacket. I was done hiding in the shadows. Justin wanted a war. He was going to get an invasion. I walked down the metal stairs to Old Betsy. I fired up the engine. The radio chatter was alive now, dozens of voices coordinating, moving into formation. I was not just an old man anymore. I was the general of a diesel army, and we were coming for my granddaughter. The ground shook before anyone heard the engines. I sat in the cab of Old Betsy, parked just inside the tree line, watching the main entrance of the gated community. At exactly 3 o'clock, the horizon turned chrome. Iron Mike led the charge in his massive Peterbilt, followed closely by Blue Dog and 18 other rigs. They did not slow down for the security gate. They smashed right through the wooden arm, rolling onto the pristine asphalt of the subdivision like a mechanized thunderstorm. The sound was deafening. 20 air horns blasted simultaneously, a unified roar that shattered windows and set off every car alarm in a 3-mile radius. It was the song of the highway brought to the doorstep of the elite. I watched as lights flickered on in every mansion on the block. Neighbors poured out of their front doors in silk pajamas, clutching their pearls and their small dogs, terrified that the apocalypse had arrived. Police cruisers flashed their lights at the end of the street, but they were helpless. My drivers had parked their rigs nose to tail, forming an impenetrable wall of steel that blocked every exit and entrance. They completely surrounded my estate, boxing it in with 50 tons of rolling iron. Justin ran out the front door screaming. He looked tiny and pathetic against the grill of Iron Mike's truck. He was waving his arms at the police, yelling about trespassing and disturbing the peace, but no one could hear him over the deafening roar of the diesel engines. The police officers were too busy trying to direct traffic and calm down the hysterical neighbors to notice one old pickup truck slipping through the service alley behind the row of hedges. The chaos was perfect. It was a wall of noise designed to blind and deafen while I went to work. I pulled Old Betsy up to the rear perimeter of my property. I killed the engine and grabbed my tool bag. I slipped on a reflective safety vest and a hard hat I kept in the truck bed. To anyone watching from a distance, I was just a utility worker checking a transformer. I moved quickly through the backyard, keeping to the shadows of the oak trees. Justin had hired cheap muscle, but even cheap muscle can be dangerous. I saw one of his guards standing by the back patio door, smoking a cigarette and looking nervously toward the front of the house where the trucks were honking. He was big, but he was distracted. He was watching the spectacle, not his post. I approached him from the blind side. The gravel crunched under my boot when I was 5 feet away. He spun around, reaching for his belt. "Hey, you cannot be back here!" he shouted. I did not give him time to finish his sentence. I swung the heavy steel pipe wrench I was carrying. I did not aim for the head because I did not want to kill him, I just wanted him down. I struck him hard in the kneecap. The bone crunched and he went down with a scream that was swallowed by the noise of the trucks out front. As he hit the ground, I stepped over him and drove his face into the dirt with my boot. "Stay down, son," I growled. "This does not concern you." He groaned, curling into a ball, clutching his leg. I grabbed his radio and threw it into the swimming pool. I turned to the back door. It was a reinforced steel security door that I had installed myself years ago. Justin had changed the digital code, but he forgot that I knew the anatomy of the frame. I jammed the flat end of a crowbar between the door and the jamb right near the deadbolt. I leaned my entire weight into it, feeling the strain in my bad shoulder. The wood splintered, the metal groaned. With a final heave, the lock snapped and the door swung open. I was inside. The house was dark and smelled of stale fear. I moved through the kitchen and into the hallway. The sound of the air horns was muffled here, a constant vibration in the floorboards. I reached the linen closet. The key was gone, but the hinges were on the outside. I took a screwdriver from my belt and popped the pins one by one. I pulled the heavy door off its frame and set it aside. Zuri was curled up in the corner on a pile of towels. Her eyes were wide and red from crying. When the light hit her, she flinched, thinking it was her father coming back to torment her. Then she saw me. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice cracking. I scooped her up into my arms. She felt so light, so fragile. I held her tight, feeling her heart beating against my chest like a trapped bird. "I got you, baby girl," I said. "We are leaving. We are going now." She clung to my neck, burying her face in my jacket. "Wait, Grandpa," she said, pulling back suddenly. She reached into the pocket of her pajamas and pulled out a sleek black tablet. It was Justin's private iPad, the one he never let anyone touch. "I took it from his desk when he dragged me out of my room," she said. "He was so mad he forgot it. He does all his business on this. He talks to the bad men on this." I looked at the device in my hand. This was it. This was the smoking gun. If Justin was laundering money or communicating with the mob, the evidence would be on this drive. "You are a brave girl, Zuri," I said, putting the tablet in my inside pocket. "You just saved us both. Now let us move." I carried her out the back door, stepping over the groaning guard who was still writhing on the patio. We ran across the lawn toward old Betsy. Suddenly the back door flew open again. "Hey!" Justin screamed from the doorway. He spotted us. He was disheveled and frantic, holding a fireplace poker in his hand. "Stop right there, old man." He started running toward us, his eyes wild. He was younger and faster than me. I threw Zuri into the passenger seat of the truck and slammed the door. I ran to the driver's side, but Justin was closing the distance. He was going to reach me before I could start the engine. Then the backyard fence exploded inward. Blue Dog's massive 18-wheeler smashed through the wooden privacy fence like it was made of paper. The truck roared into the backyard, tearing up the sod, its headlights blinding Justin. He froze, shielding his eyes from the glare. Blue Dog blasted the air horn, a sound so loud it knocked the wind out of you. Justin stumbled back, dropping the poker, falling onto his backside in the grass. The truck maneuvered, putting its massive bulk between me and my son-in-law, creating a wall of steel. I did not waste a second. I jumped into the cab of old Betsy and fired the engine. I threw it into reverse and spun the truck around, spraying dirt all over Justin. I saw him through the window as I sped away. He was on his knees, screaming silently in the noise, watching his hostage and his leverage drive away into the night. I grabbed the CB radio microphone. "Package is secure," I shouted over the roar. "All units scatter. Repeat scatter." The wall of trucks broke formation, peeling away in different directions, leaving the police and the neighborhood in total confusion. I hit the gas, driving my granddaughter toward the safety of the dark highway, leaving my former life and my burning bridges in the rearview mirror. Part 6. Evidence in the tablet. I drove old Betsy until the city lights were just a glow in the rearview mirror, finally pulling into the lot of the Starlight Motel, a rundown roadside stop that had not seen a fresh coat of paint since the Reagan administration. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear, and that was exactly what I needed. I carried a sleeping Zuri into room 12 and laid her on the lumpy mattress, covering her with my jacket. She was exhausted, her small face streaked with dried tears, but finally peaceful. I sat in the single wobbly chair by the window and pulled the black tablet from my pocket. It felt heavy in my hand, colder than the night air. Zuri had told me the passcode was her birthday. Of course it was. Justin was the kind of narcissist who used the dates of the people he owned as keys to his secrets. I punched in the numbers and the screen unlocked, revealing a grid of apps that looked innocent enough at first glance. But I knew what to look for. I bypassed the games and the social media and went straight to the hidden folder labeled System Utils. Inside, I found a secure encrypted messaging app and a mobile banking platform I recognized from my days dealing with international shipping. I opened the banking app first. My breath caught in my throat. It was not just a ledger of debts. It was a complex network of shell companies moving staggering amounts of money. I saw transfers coming in from accounts in the Cayman Islands and Mexico, then filtering out through a dummy corporation called KM Boutique. That was Keisha's failed clothing line, the one I had bailed out 3 times. Justin was not just a gambler. He was a laundromat. He was washing dirty money for a cartel, moving millions of dollars of narcotics proceeds through my daughter's business accounts. He had turned my family into an accessory to federal crimes. I scrolled through the transaction history. There was a deficit, a massive gaping hole of $5 million labeled loss seizure. He had skimmed from the top. He had stolen from thieves thinking he was smarter than them. He had bet their money on crypto and lost it all. Now they wanted it back, and my life insurance was his only way to pay the bill. I minimized the banking app and opened the messaging thread. I needed to know how deep this went. I needed to know if my daughter was a hostage to his stupidity or a partner in his crimes. I found the thread labeled Wifey. My hands trembled as I tapped it. I scrolled back a week. I was looking for fear. I was looking for texts from Keisha saying she was scared or asking him to stop. Instead, I found a conversation that ripped the last shred of my heart right out of my chest. "Is he dead yet?" Keisha had texted 3 days ago. "Not yet," Justin had replied. "The old man is tough. The poison is too slow. We do not have time." Justin, Keisha wrote back, "The interest is compounding. Just push him down the stairs and call it an accident. I do not care how you do it, just get it done. I deserve that money. I have waited 35 years for him to die so I can finally live." I dropped the tablet on the table. The screen stared up at me, glowing in the dim light. I felt like I had been shot. I could handle Justin being a monster. He was a stranger I let into my house. But Keisha, my baby girl, the girl whose hair I had braided on Sunday mornings, the girl I had sat up with when she had the chicken pox, the woman I had walked down the aisle thinking I was giving her away to happiness. She did not just know, she was pushing him. She was impatient for my death. She felt entitled to the fruits of my labor so intensely that my heartbeat was just an annoyance to her. I looked over at Zuri sleeping on the bed. Keisha was not being coerced. She was not a victim of a bad marriage. She was the architect of her own father's demise. The realization killed Clarence the father and woke up Clarence the survivor. I had no daughter anymore. I only had an enemy who shared my DNA. The tablet buzzed against the wooden table, startling me. A notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. It was from an app called Signal. The sender ID was simply a skull emoji. I hesitated, then tapped it. The message was short and terrifying. "The grace period is over, Justin. We saw the news. Your father-in-law is not dead. You failed." A second message popped up immediately after. "You owe us $5 million plus interest. If the money is not in the account by noon tomorrow, we stop asking. We start collecting." Then an image loaded. It was a photo taken from a car parked across the street from Zuri's elementary school. It was followed by a photo of the front gate of my mansion. "Prepare the coffins. One for you, one for the wife, one for the kid." I stared at the threat. This was the cartel. These were men who did not make idle threats. They were watching. They knew where we lived. They knew where Zuri went to school. Justin had brought the devil to my doorstep, and now the devil was knocking. I looked at the time. It was 4 a.m. I had 8 hours before these animals came hunting. I could not go to the police. If I showed them this, they would arrest Justin and Keisha, but the cartel would still come for Zuri to send a message. Snitches get families killed. I needed to handle this the way we handled problems in the 70s. I needed to cut the head off the snake. I picked up the tablet and typed a reply, my fingers moving with cold precision. "This is not Justin. This is Clarence Jefferson. I have your money. Meet me at the old rail yard at midnight. Come alone or I burn the ledger and send the feds everything I have on your operation." I hit send. I was not running anymore. I was setting a trap. And if I was going to go down, I was taking every single one of them with me. I woke up to the sound of my own name coming from the television set in the corner of the motel room. I sat up, rubbing the grit from my eyes, and grabbed the remote to turn up the volume. It was the local morning news, but the headline banner was red and urgent. "Breaking news. Grandfather abducts 7-year-old heiress." The screen cut to a live press conference standing on the steps of the city courthouse. There was Justin wearing a sweater instead of a suit, looking disheveled and sleepless. He was clutching a tissue, and standing next to him was Dr. Hoffman, the man who was supposed to kill me last night. Hoffman was wearing a white coat and looking grave. "We are devastated," Justin sobbed into the microphones. "My father-in-law, Clarence Jefferson, has been battling aggressive dementia for months. We tried to keep it private to protect his dignity, but last night he suffered a psychotic break. He became violent. He attacked our security staff and snatched my daughter Zuri from her bed. We believe he is armed and confused. He does not know who he is anymore." I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Justin was not just covering his tracks, he was rewriting reality. Dr. Hoffman stepped up to the podium, adjusting his glasses. "As Mr. Jefferson's primary physician, I can confirm the diagnosis." Hoffman lied, his voice smooth as oil. "He suffers from a rare form of cognitive decline that manifests in paranoia and sudden aggression. He believes his family is conspiring against him. He is a danger to himself and the child. If you see him, do not approach. Call 911 immediately." The reporter came back on screen, showing a photo of me and Zuri taken at a barbecue last summer. The image was frozen and ominous. Please bring her home, Dad, Justin wailed in the background. We just want to get you the help you need. I looked over at Zuri, who was sitting on the bed eating a vending machine Pop-Tart. She was watching the TV with wide eyes. Why is Daddy lying? She asked. Why did he say you are sick? Because he is scared. Baby girl, I said, turning off the TV. He is using the world to hunt us because he is too weak to do it himself. I checked my burner phone. It was blowing up with alerts, but not the kind I wanted. These were public safety notifications. My face was on every phone in the state. An Amber Alert had been issued. Blue silver Honda Civic or older model Ford truck. Suspect is elderly African-American male. Extreme caution advised. I had to ditch old Betsy. My truck was now a beacon leading the police straight to us. But before I could figure out the logistics, I needed cash. I had withdrawn some yesterday, but running from a manhunt required more than pocket change. I logged into my secondary personal account on the tablet, the one I kept for maintenance on the warehouse. Access denied. The words flashed in red. I tried another account. Account frozen by court order case number 49221. They had moved faster than I anticipated. Justin had used the fake medical diagnosis to get an emergency injunction. A judge had signed off on freezing my assets to protect the estate from a mentally incompetent fugitive. I was a billionaire on paper, but in that motel room I was a beggar. I checked my wallet. I had $400 in cash and a half tank of gas. I was cut off from my empire, my resources, and my reputation. I looked out the window through the gap in the curtains. A police cruiser rolled slowly past the motel entrance. They were scanning license plates. My heart hammered against my ribs. We could not stay here. We could not use credit cards. We could not use my truck. We were ghosts now. I grabbed my duffel bag and signaled to Zuri. We have to go, I said. We are leaving the truck. We are walking. But Grandpa, my legs hurt, she complained. I know, baby, I said, hoisting the bag onto my shoulder. But if we stay here, the bad men win. We slipped out the back door into the alley, leaving old Betsy behind like a faithful horse that could go no further. We walked for 3 miles, sticking to the drainage ditches and the service roads behind the strip malls until we reached the industrial district. My bad knee was screaming, but I did not stop. We finally reached the back entrance of the warehouse, my sanctuary. It was cold inside and the shadows stretched long across the concrete floor. I did not dare turn on the heat or the main lights. The police might have thermal scanners or drones. We set up camp in the foreman's office, the only room with no windows to the outside. Dinner was a can of cold ravioli opened with a pocket knife and eaten with plastic spoons I found in a desk drawer. Zuri sat on the cot wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket, staring at the tin can like it was alien food. Is this what we have to eat? She asked, wrinkling her nose. I used to eat this every day when I was your age, I told her, sitting on the floor with my back against the door. Before I had the trucks, before I had the big house, I lived in a room smaller than this with my 3 brothers. We did not have heaters. We slept in our coats. Zuri took a small bite, chewing slowly. Were you scared? She asked. Every day, I said. But being scared keeps you awake. And being awake keeps you alive. Being poor teaches you things that being rich makes you forget. It teaches you how to be quiet. It teaches you how to wait. And right now, Zuri, we are waiting. I watched her eat, realizing that this was the first time in her life she had ever experienced discomfort. She had been raised in silk and driven in limousines. Now she was learning the lesson I had tried to protect her from. The world is hard and it does not care about your last name. But as she scraped the bottom of the can and licked the spoon, I saw a spark in her eyes I had not seen before. She wasn't complaining anymore, she was adapting. She handed me the empty can. It wasn't bad, Grandpa, she said, wiping tomato sauce from her chin. What do we do next? I smiled for the first time that day. Next we fight, I said. I pulled the tablet back out. The battery was at 40%. I had sent a message to the cartel. Now I needed to secure the one thing Justin could not freeze and the police could not confiscate. I needed the leverage that was hidden in the physical world. I stood up and dusted off my pants. Get your shoes on, Zuri, I said. We have a meeting to get to and we cannot be late. The darkness of the warehouse felt less like a prison and more like a fortress. We were at the bottom, but that just meant we had a solid foundation to kick off from. The digital walls had closed in around me, turning my billions into useless pixels on a frozen screen. But Justin forgot that I built my empire in a time when a handshake meant a contract and gold bars were heavier than Bitcoin. I needed the physical master key to the literal steel safe inside the old Jefferson Logistics headquarters. That safe held the original bearer stock certificates for the company. Whoever held those papers owned the company regardless of what a computer database said. There was only one person I trusted to keep the backup key, and that was Etta May. She was 80 years old and had been my executive assistant for 40 years until Keisha fired her on her 75th birthday, calling her a senile relic who smelled like mothballs. Keisha did not know that Etta was sharper than a razor and loyal to the grave. We took 3 different city buses to get to the historic district where Etta lived in a small bungalow surrounded by overgrown azaleas. I told Zuri to wait in the bushes across the street. I did not like the look of the sedan parked 2 houses down. It was too clean for this neighborhood. It had tinted windows and government plates. Justin had put a bounty on my head, and the mercenaries were circling. I pulled my hat low and walked up the driveway, my hand gripping the can of industrial-grade pepper spray in my pocket. I had kept it from my trucking days when lot lizards and hijackers were a nightly threat. I knocked on the door using our old code. 3 sharp raps. A pause. 2 soft taps. There was no answer. Etta was never not home, and she never ignored the code. My stomach dropped. I tried the knob. It was unlocked. Etta slept with a police bar under the handle. I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning in the silence. The living room was tossed. Books were pulled from the shelves. Cushions were slashed. They had been looking for something. Well, look who decided to show up. The voice came from the kitchen. A man stepped out. He was young, maybe 25, wearing a tight t-shirt and holding a baseball bat. He had a neck tattoo and the dead eyes of someone who hurt people for fun. "Justin really scraped the bottom of the barrel for you, didn't he, son?" I said, keeping my voice steady. "Where is Mrs. Washington?" "She is tied up in the pantry, old man," the thug said, slapping the bat into his palm. "She wouldn't talk. Maybe you will be more cooperative." A second man stepped out from the hallway behind me, blocking the exit. He was bigger, holding a knife. "We know you have the girl outside. Give us the location of the safe key and we let the kid go. Otherwise, we start cutting pieces off the old lady." They made a critical error. They assumed I was just a businessman in a suit. They did not know I grew up fighting in the mud pits of the Delta. They did not know that when you corner a wild animal, you do not show it a knife, you shoot it. I did not hesitate. I spun around and unleashed a cloud of orange pepper spray directly into the face of the man with the knife. He screamed, dropping the blade and clawing at his eyes as the chemical fire melted his corneas. The man with the bat charged. He swung for my head, intending to crack my skull like a melon. I dropped to my knees, my old joints screaming in protest. The bat whooshed over my head, smashing into the plaster wall. I grabbed the power cord of the vintage floor lamp next to me. I had noticed the fraying wire when I walked in. Etta always meant to fix it. I yanked it from the wall socket, stripping the insulation with my thumbnail in one motion. As the thug raised the bat for a second swing, I jammed the exposed copper wires into his thigh. He convulsed as 110 volts of electricity locked his muscles. He foamed at the mouth and collapsed, shaking violently on the hardwood floor. The smell of ozone and burnt hair filled the room. I stood up, breathing hard, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I kicked the knife away from the blinded man who was still rolling on the floor, sobbing. I walked over to him and leaned down. "Tell Justin that if he sends boys to do a man's job again, I will send them back in boxes." I ran to the pantry and tore the door open. Etta was sitting on the floor, bound with duct tape, her eyes wide with terror but unhurt. I ripped the tape from her mouth. "Clarence," she gasped. "I knew you would come." I untied her quickly. Her hands were shaking, but she stood up with dignity, smoothing her housecoat. "They wanted the key, Clarence. They tore my house apart looking for it. Did they find it?" I asked, helping her to a chair. Etta smiled, a toothless grin that lit up the room. "They looked in the mattress. They looked in the freezer. They even looked in my Bible. But they did not look in the cat litter." She pointed to the plastic box in the corner where her fat tabby cat was currently sleeping. She walked over, dug through the gravel, and pulled out a small velvet bag wrapped in 3 layers of Ziploc plastic. "Here it is," she said, handing it to me. "The key to the kingdom." "But Clarence, that is not all I have." She reached into her bodice and pulled out a folded, yellowed envelope. It smelled of lavender and old paper. "When your wife Odessa got sick, she came to see me. She knew she was dying. And she knew something else too. She knew Keisha was rotten." I took the envelope. My hands trembled as I recognized Odessa's elegant handwriting. "What is this, Etta?" "It is a codicil to her will," Etta said, her voice soft. "A secret amendment she filed 20 years ago. She saw the way Keisha looked at money even back then. She saw the entitlement. She told me to keep this hidden and only give it to you if Keisha ever tried to hurt you. It says that if Keisha ever attempts to seize the estate or harm the family, her inheritance is revoked entirely. Every penny goes directly to the first grandchild upon their 18th birthday, and until then the grandfather retains sole guardianship." I stared at the paper. Odessa had seen the future. She had looked into our daughter's soul and seen the greed growing there like a cancer. She had protected me from beyond the grave. This document was not just a will. It was a nuclear weapon. It stripped Keisha of everything. It made Zuri the rightful owner of the empire, and it made me her legal protector. "But we have a problem," Etta said, her face darkening. "This is just a copy. The original notarized version was stored in the archives of Old Man Miller the lawyer. He died 5 years ago. His son Darius took over the practice, but he is a drunk and a gambler. He has the archives in a storage unit somewhere in the bottoms. If Justin finds out about this, he will find Darius, and he will burn that original." I looked at the unconscious thug on the floor. His phone was buzzing in his pocket. I pulled it out. There was a text message from Justin. "Did you get the key? Burn the house. Leave no witnesses." He was not just trying to rob me, he was scrubbing the board. I grabbed Zuri from the bushes across the street. She hugged Etta, crying into her apron. "We cannot stay here," I said. "Etta, grab your coat. You are coming with us. We are going to find Darius, and we are going to find him before Justin does, because if that paper burns, Zuri loses her future, and I will be damned if I let that happen." We piled into the night, moving fast, the weight of the key in my pocket and the ghost of my wife guiding my hand. The war had just shifted fronts. It was a race now, a race to the bottom of a bottle in the worst part of town. We sped down Martin Luther King Boulevard in a truck that smelled like wet dog and fear, while Etta clutched her purse like it contained the nuclear codes. She told me the hard truth about the original notarized will that Odessa had signed, which was sitting in the wall safe behind the painting in my study. The same study where Justin had been drinking cheap champagne. "He has already drilled it," Etta said, looking out the window at the passing streetlights, "because I saw the invoice for the locksmith on his desk before Keisha fired me. He cracked that safe 3 days ago, Clarence, and he burned everything he found inside. He did not know what he was burning, he just knew it looked legal and dangerous." My hands tightened on the steering wheel until the leather creaked because Justin had incinerated my wife's final wishes and turned her legacy into ash in the fireplace. But lawyers are paranoid creatures, and Old Man Miller never trusted a client to keep a document safe, so he kept carbon copies of everything in a fireproof facility. When he died, his son Darius inherited the practice, but Darius did not inherit the work ethic, he inherited the thirst. Etta told me Darius lost the office and moved the archives to a self-storage unit in the Bottoms, the worst neighborhood in the city, where he pays the rent by selling off old client secrets to blackmailers. If Justin finds out that a drunkard is sitting on the only piece of paper that can strip him of his millions, he will not just buy the paper, he will buy the whole storage unit and torch it. We stopped at a red light while the rain hammered the roof of the truck, and Etta reached into her bag again to pull out a small book bound in cracked red leather. It was Odessa's diary, which I had never opened because I thought a woman's thoughts were her own sanctuary. "Read the entry from 10 years ago, Etta said, her voice trembling, so I turned the yellowed pages to see the handwriting that was elegant and familiar, a ghost speaking from the past. October 4th, 2014. I met Justin today and he smiles with his mouth, but his eyes are cold calculators. He asked about Clarence's heart condition before he asked about Keisha's hobbies. He is a predator, and I know it in my bones, but Clarence is so happy because he thinks he finally has a son. He thinks Keisha is safe, and if I tell him the truth now, it will break him. So I will let him have this joy for a little while longer, and I will protect the money silently. I closed the book, and a tear leaked out, tracking through the grime on my face because my wife had seen the devil at the dinner table and she had held her tongue to protect my heart. She had carried the burden of that knowledge to her deathbed, and I felt a wave of shame so hot it burned my skin. I had been a fool who was so desperate for a legacy that I ignored the viper in the nest. But shame is a useless emotion in a war, so I converted it into fuel. I would not let her sacrifice be in vain, and I would honor her silence by making a noise so loud it would shake the foundations of this city. The light turned green, but I did not move because my burner phone lit up on the dashboard with an alert from the tracking app I had secretly installed on Justin's car months ago when I first suspected he was using it for drug runs. The dot on the map was moving fast, leaving the affluent suburbs and heading south straight toward the bottoms. He knew. Somehow he knew. Maybe he had tortured the information out of someone else, or maybe he had hired a hacker, but it did not matter how. The only thing that mattered was that he was 10 minutes ahead of us driving a Porsche that could do 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, while I was driving a 30-year-old Ford that shook when it hit 50. But I knew these streets, and I knew the shortcuts through the alleys and the industrial yards that a GPS would never show. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, and old Betsy roared in protest, but she surged forward. "We are going to race him, Etta," I shouted over the engine noise, "so hold on to Zuri. If he gets to Darius first, he will kill him and burn that archive." I drifted the heavy truck around a corner, jumping the curb and smashing through a chain-link fence to bounce through a lumber yard, cutting off 3 miles of city traffic. I saw the headlights of the Porsche on the parallel highway above us, and he was fast, but he was driving like a tourist. I was driving like a man who had nothing left to lose. The race for the soul of my family was happening at 80 miles an hour in the pouring rain, and I swore on Odessa's grave I would not come in second. The Bottoms was a part of the city that City Hall forgot about 20 years ago, and the streetlights did not work here because the copper wire had been stripped out of them a decade ago. I drove old Betsy through the mud and the trash that littered the streets, while the rain came down hard enough to drown a man standing up. Zuri was huddled in the back seat between Etta and a pile of oily rags, and I told her to keep her head down, because this was not a place for children. This was a place where desperation was the local currency and life was cheaper than a tank of gas. I saw Justin's Porsche parked in front of a row of rusted storage containers that people were using as apartments. The car looked like a spaceship that had crash-landed in a landfill, and it was already being eyed by 2 kids on bicycles who were circling it like sharks. Justin was an idiot for bringing a $100,000 car into a neighborhood where people killed for shoes. I killed the headlights and rolled the truck to a stop behind a dumpster that smelled of rotting fish and chemical waste. I told Etta to lock the doors and keep the engine running. If I was not back in 5 minutes, she was to drive straight to the police station, regardless of the consequences. I stepped out into the rain, and the mud sucked at my boots like it was trying to pull me down into the earth. I walked toward Unit 4B, where the door was hanging off its hinges and the sound of a man screaming was cutting through the noise of the storm. I stepped through the broken doorway, and the smell of stale beer and fresh blood hit me like a physical blow. The room was lit by a single hanging bulb that swung back and forth, casting long shadows that danced on the peeling walls. Darius was tied to a metal folding chair in the center of the room, and his face was a mask of red pulp. He was weeping and begging, but the 2 men standing over him did not care about his tears. They were hired muscle, the kind you find in underground gyms and backroom poker games. One was huge with knuckles the size of walnuts, and the other was wiry with a switchblade dancing between his fingers. Justin was standing in the corner trying to keep his expensive Italian loafers out of the puddle of filth on the floor. He looked pale and sick, but there was a cruel excitement in his eyes as he watched the violence. He held a lighter in his hand, ready to burn the history of my family the moment they found the box. "Tell us where the file is, Darius," the big man shouted, and he backhanded the lawyer across the face. I did not run in screaming, and I did not pull a weapon because a man of my age knows that true power does not need to shout. I walked into the light, and I stood there with my hands in my pockets, looking at the scene with the boredom of a foreman watching a lazy crew. "That is enough," I said, my voice low and gravelly. The room froze. The wiry man spun around with the knife, and Justin let out a squeak of surprise. Clarence Justin stammered, "How are you here? You are supposed to be running." I ignored him and looked at the big man who was raising his fists. I did not flinch. I looked him dead in the eye, and I smiled a cold, humorless smile. "You are Big T's nephew, aren't you, son? I recognize that scar on your chin, and I recognize the way you stand. I gave your uncle his first job on the loading docks in 1982 when he came out of prison. I paid for his funeral when he passed last year. Does your mother know you are out here beating up defenseless drunks for a man who cannot even change his own tire?" The big man lowered his hands slowly, confusion replacing the aggression in his eyes. "Mr. Jefferson?" he asked. "I thought you were retired." "I am retired," I said, stepping closer until I was chest to chest with him. "But I am still the man who signs the checks that keep half this neighborhood fed. You are working for a tourist. This man does not belong here, and he does not respect you. He thinks he can buy you like he buys his suits. Walk away, son. This is not a war you want to be on the wrong side of." The wiry man with the knife was not as impressed by history, and he stepped forward, waving the blade. "I do not care who you are, old man," he spat. We were promised 10 grand for the box and we are not leaving without it. Justin found his courage then and stepped out from the corner. That is right, he yelled, his voice cracking. I will pay you double. $20,000 if you drop him right now. Kill him and the money is yours. The air in the room grew heavy and electric. The big man looked torn between respect and greed, but the knife man was hungry. He tensed his muscles, preparing to lunge. I knew I could not fight them both, and I knew that if violence started, Darius would be collateral damage. I needed to end this without throwing a punch. I slowly pulled my left hand out of my pocket and raised it into the light. On my wrist sat a solid gold Rolex President with a diamond bezel. It was the watch Odessa had given me for our 40th anniversary. It was the only thing of value I had left in this world, and it was worth $50,000 easily. I unclasped it and held it up, letting it catch the light of the swinging bulb. It glittered like a star in that dirty room. Forget his promises, I said. My eyes locked on the knife man. He does not have $20,000. His cards are frozen and his assets are seized. He is writing checks his bank cannot cash. But this watch is real gold. It is heavy, it is untraceable, and it is worth 5 times what he promised you. I tossed the watch through the air. It sailed in a slow arc, a golden comet of sacrifice. The knife man caught it instinctively. He looked at the weight of it, and he looked at the diamonds, and the greed washed away his loyalty to Justin instantly. We are done here, he said, shoving the watch into his pocket. Let's go. The big man looked at me and nodded a silent apology before following his partner out into the rain. Justin screamed after them. Come back, you cowards, I will pay you, I swear it. But they were gone, and he was alone with the man he had tried to kill. I walked over to the shelf behind the chair where a dusty banker's box sat ignored. I picked it up and felt the weight of justice inside. I looked at Justin, who was now trembling against the wall, his lighter useless in his shaking hand. You can keep the lighter, son, I said. You are going to need it to see where you are going because it is about to get very dark for you. I cut Darius loose and dragged him out to the truck, leaving my son-in-law alone in the filth of his own making. I walked out of the rusted storage unit with the banker's box tucked under my arm, shielding it from the relentless rain with my leather jacket. The weight of that box felt like the weight of the world, but for the first time in 48 hours I felt a glimmer of hope. I had the evidence. I had the will. I had the leverage to bury Justin and save my granddaughter. I took 2 steps toward Old Betsy, where Etta and Zuri were watching me with wide, fearful eyes through the fogged windshield. Then the world exploded in blinding red and blue light. It was not just one patrol car. It was a swarm. 6 cruisers screeched into the mud-slicked lot, cutting off every exit. Sirens wailed, bouncing off the metal containers, creating a disorienting wall of noise. Spotlights hit me from every angle, blinding me instantly. I froze. I knew the drill. I knew what happened to men who looked like me in neighborhoods like this when they made sudden movements. I slowly lowered the box to the wet ground and raised my hands. Justin had not just called for backup, he had called in an active kidnapping threat. He had weaponized the police force against me. I saw him standing near the corner of the unit, smiling as the officers advanced with weapons drawn. He had timed this perfectly. He let me do the dirty work of finding the document and fighting the thugs, only to swoop in when the prize was secured. Get on the ground now. The command was shouted with the adrenaline of a rookie cop terrified of the unknown. I dropped to my knees, letting the mud soak into my trousers. I lay face down, crossing my ankles. I felt a heavy boot press into my spine and the cold steel of handcuffs ratcheting tight around my wrists. They patted me down roughly, pulling my wallet and the burner phone from my pockets. I turned my head to the side, spitting mud just in time to see them surround my truck. They pulled Etta out first. She was screaming at them, telling them they were making a mistake, but they ignored her. Then they opened the back door. The sound of Zuri screaming for me shattered my heart in a way that no physical blow ever could. "Grandpa, help me!" she cried, thrashing as a female officer tried to hold her. She was reaching for me, her small fingers clawing at the air. I tried to push myself up. I tried to shout that she was safe with me, that I was protecting her. But the boot on my back pressed harder, driving the air from my lungs. "Stay down, suspect," the officer barked. Then Justin walked into the frame. He walked right past the officers who nodded at him like he was the victim. He walked past Etta, who spat at his feet. He went straight to the truck and pulled Zuri away from the female officer. "I got her," he said, his voice dripping with fake relief. "Thank you, officers. Thank you for saving my daughter from this maniac." Zuri fought him, kicking his shins, but he held her tight, whispering something in her ear that made her go limp with fear. He handed her off to Keisha, who had just arrived in a second car looking perfectly put together for a woman whose father was being arrested in the mud. Justin walked over to where I lay pinned to the ground. He picked up the banker's box. He checked the contents, ensuring the file was there. Then he knelt down next to my head. He leaned in close so only I could hear him over the rain and the sirens. "You really are a resourceful old man, Clarence," he whispered. "I appreciate you doing the heavy lifting for me. I would have never found this place on my own. Now I have the girl, I have the will, and you have a jail cell. Enjoy the rest of your short life." He stood up and walked away, clutching my wife's legacy like a trophy. They hauled me up and shoved me into the back of the cruiser. The hard plastic seat was cold and the cage separated me from the world. I watched through the wire mesh as they drove away. I watched Justin put the box in his trunk. I watched Keisha shove Zuri into the back seat of her luxury sedan. I watched them drive off back to my mansion, back to the comfort I had paid for leaving me in the filth of the bottoms. The officer got in the front seat and radioed dispatch, "Suspect in custody. The child is secure with the parents. We are bringing him in." As the car lurched forward, bumping over the potholes, I leaned my head back against the partition. Most men would have been broken. Most men would have been screaming or crying. But I closed my eyes and I let out a long, slow breath. And then in the darkness of the back seat, I smiled. Justin thought this was checkmate. He thought that by stripping me of my freedom, he had stripped me of my power. But he was a tourist in the world of warfare. He did not understand that he had just made a fatal tactical error. By arresting me, he had moved the fight out of the shadows and into the system. He had forced the conflict into the public record. There would be a booking. There would be an arraignment, there would be a judge, and where there was a judge, there was discovery, there was evidence. Running had made me look guilty. Being in custody made me a defendant with rights. I had Reggie Banks, the best lawyer in the state, on speed dial in my head. I had the digital evidence backed up on a cloud server Justin did not know about. And now, thanks to his arrogance, I had him on record taking possession of the very box that proved his motive for murder. He thought he was burying me, but he was just planting a seed. I was going to turn that courtroom into a slaughterhouse, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. Let them take me to jail. They were just giving me a stage for the final act. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and cheap cologne, a scent that could not mask the stench of the lies being told on the stand. 3 days had passed since my arrest, and the media circus had descended upon the courthouse like vultures spotting a carcass. I sat at the defense table wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that scratched my skin, my wrists shackled to the table bolt. Beside me sat Reggie Banks, the only man in the room who knew that this trial was not an execution, but an ambush. Across the aisle, Justin sat next to the prosecutor looking like a broken angel. He wore a navy blue suit that made him look honest, and he dabbed at his dry eyes with a white handkerchief every time the cameras turned his way. The gallery was packed. Neighbors I had known for 20 years looked at me with pity or disgust. They whispered behind their hands, pointing at the crazy old man who had kidnapped his own granddaughter. Justin took the stand first. He told the jury a heartbreaking story about my slow decline into madness. He talked about how I had started forgetting names and how I had become paranoid about my money. He claimed he had only tried to get power of attorney to protect me from scammers. He wept when he described the night of the party, claiming I had attacked him in a fit of dementia-induced rage. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. He was painting a picture of a loving son-in-law forced to make hard choices for a senile patriarch. Then came Dr. Hoffman. He walked to the stand with the confidence of a man who had been lying for a living for decades. He placed a thick file on the podium. He projected brain scans onto the screens for the jury to see. "These are Mr. Jefferson's MRI results from last week," Hoffman said, pointing to the gray blobs. "You can see the significant atrophy in the frontal lobe. This indicates severe aggression, impulse control issues, and a complete detachment from reality. In my professional opinion, he is not competent to stand trial or manage his own affairs. He requires immediate institutionalization in a secure facility." The jury nodded. The public murmured in agreement. I could feel the walls closing in. Hoffman had forged the medical records perfectly. To the untrained eye, I was a ticking time bomb. Even the judge looked at me with sympathy. Justin looked over at me and offered a sad little smile, but his eyes were dancing. He thought he had won. He thought he was minutes away from getting the gavel bang that would lock me away and hand him the keys to my kingdom. Reggie Banks stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket. He did not cross-examine Hoffman. He did not scream or object. He simply walked to the center of the room, holding the black tablet I had retrieved from the warehouse. "Your Honor," Reggie said, his voice booming off the mahogany walls. "The defense has no questions for the doctor because the doctor never examined my client. Those scans are fake, and we can prove it not with medical experts but with the defendant's own granddaughter." The prosecutor jumped up, shouting objection, but the judge was curious. "Overruled," the judge said. "Proceed, Mr. Banks." Reggie connected the tablet to the courtroom's AV system. The large screens flickered and then a video appeared. It was shaky footage taken from the height of a 7-year-old child. It was filmed through the crack of a door looking into my private study. The date stamp on the video was 3 weeks ago. In the frame, Justin was sitting at my desk. He was not working. He was holding a light box and a sheet of tracing paper. He was hunched over a document, practicing my signature over and over again. The audio was crystal clear. "Perfect," Justin muttered on the video, holding up a check. "That looks exactly like the old man's scratch." He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Hey Hoffman, it is Justin. I got the signature down. You get the fake charts ready. We are going to need them when we commit him next week." The courtroom exploded. It was not a murmur this time, it was a roar. The jurors gasped. The judge's eyes went wide. Dr. Hoffman turned a shade of pale that looked like wet chalk. He tried to stand up, but his legs gave out and he slumped back into the witness chair. Justin froze. His sad smile vanished, replaced by a look of absolute terror. On the screen, the video continued. Justin laughed into the phone. "Yeah, the cartel is breathing down my neck, but once I get power of attorney, I can liquidate the assets and pay them off. The old man won't know what hit him." Reggie paused the video. The image of Justin laughing about his crime froze on the giant screens looming over the courtroom like a ghost. Reggie turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are not looking at a concerned son. You are looking at a desperate debtor who forged signatures, falsified medical records, and conspired to imprison a sane man to pay off a drug debt." "Order, order in this court," the judge screamed, banging his gavel so hard it sounded like a gunshot. The noise died down, but the tension remained thick and suffocating. The judge looked at Justin, then at Hoffman, then at me. He was a man of the law, and he had just realized his court was being used as a weapon for a crime. "Bailiff, seize that tablet into evidence," the judge ordered. "Mr. Prosecutor, I am suspending these proceedings immediately. I am ordering a full independent investigation into the origin of these medical records and the authenticity of every document submitted by the plaintiff. Dr. Hoffman, you are not to leave the jurisdiction. Mr. Banks, your motion to dismiss the competency hearing is granted pending investigation." The gavel came down again. It was the sound of my freedom, but it was also the sound of Justin's death sentence. The court officers moved to secure the room. Justin sat paralyzed at the plaintiff's table. He was not looking at the judge. He was looking at his watch. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. The cartel had given him until noon. He had 1 hour to pay $5 million, or he was a dead man. The legal victory meant nothing to him now because the law moves slow, but the mob moves fast. I watched him from across the aisle. He was shaking. He pulled his phone from his pocket under the table. I saw him read a message. His face went slack. He looked up and his eyes met mine. There was no arrogance left. There was only the pleading look of a man who hears the reaper's footsteps. He mouthed the word, "Help." I just stared back at him, my face like stone. He had dug this grave with a golden shovel, and now he had to lie in it. The bailiffs began to escort me out the back door to process my release paperwork, but the chaos in the room was escalating. Justin tried to run. He jumped up and tried to push past his own lawyer heading for the side exit. Court officers tackled him to the ground. "Get off me," he screamed. "You do not understand. They are going to kill me. I need to get out of here." As they dragged him away, kicking and screaming, I looked at Reggie. "Get me out on bail fast," I said. "Why the rush?" Clarence Reggie asked, packing his briefcase. "We won." "No," I said, watching the doors swing shut behind my screaming son-in-law. "We did not win yet. The cartel is not going to wait for the police to finish their investigation. They are going to come for the money. And if they cannot get it from him, they are going to look for the next person in line. They are going to come for my daughter." Reggie stopped. "Keisha," he asked, "is she involved?" "She is the collateral," I said. "Justin used her company to launder the money. If he does not pay, they take her. I need to get to her before they do. Because even though she betrayed me, she is still my blood. And I will be damned if I let street thugs take a Jefferson." The judge had given me a reprieve, but the real trial was just starting, and the verdict would be delivered in lead. The holding cell at the county jail smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies, but for Justin it smelled like a coffin. He sat in the corner shivering in his ruined Navy suit while the other inmates eyed him like a piece of fresh meat. He was not built for this world. He was a man of country clubs and heated leather seats, and now he was sitting on a cold concrete bench, waiting for his arraignment. A guard walked up to the bars and called his name. "Your lawyer is here," the guard grunted, unlocking the gate. Justin scrambled up, hope flooding his face. He thought he was getting bailed out. He thought the nightmare was over. He was led into a small interview room with a metal table and a two-way mirror. But the man sitting there was not the expensive criminal defense attorney he had hired. The man was wearing a suit that fit too perfectly, and he had eyes that looked like shark glass. He did not introduce himself. He simply placed a smartphone on the table and slid it across to Justin. "Press play," the man said softly. Justin's hands shook as he touched the screen. The video showed the master bedroom of my mansion. The room was tossed. In the center of the bed, Keisha was kneeling with duct tape over her mouth and zip ties cutting into her wrists. A masked man held a gun to her temple. She was crying, her mascara running down her face in black streaks of terror. Justin dropped the phone. "Please," he begged, sliding to his knees. "I can get the money. I just need time. The old man ruined everything." The man in the suit did not blink. "You had time, Justin. You had 6 months. Mr. Varga is done waiting. We have the wife. We know she is the signatory on the shell company you used to steal from us. She is responsible for the debt. Unless someone else pays it, she dies tonight." Justin looked at the phone, then at the man. His survival instinct kicked in, overriding any loyalty he ever pretended to have. "It is not her money," he blurted out, desperate to deflect the bullet. "It is Clarence. It is the old man. He has bearer bonds. He has the original stock certificates for the company. They are worth $50 million. He has them with him right now. He is the one you want. Take him and let us go." The man in the suit smiled a thin, cruel expression. "You just sold your father-in-law to save your skin. Very good. We will reach out to Mr. Jefferson, if he pays your wife lives. If he refuses, we will send her to you in pieces." I was standing on the steps of the precinct, breathing the free air while Reggie Banks signed the final paperwork for my release. I was out on bail, but I was not free. I was a man walking through a minefield. Zuri was safe with Etta at a secure location, but I knew the war was not over. My burner phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it. Then Reggie's personal cell phone rang. He looked at the screen and frowned. "It is an unknown number," he said, "but they have the bypass code for my emergency line. Only my family has that code." I felt a cold pit open in my stomach. "Answer it, Reggie," I said. He put it on speaker. "Mr. Jefferson," a voice said, smooth and heavily accented. "We have a mutual acquaintance who is currently in a holding cell. He tells us you are the man with the checkbook." "Who is this?" I asked, though I already knew. It was the Reaper calling to collect. "We have your daughter, Keisha," the voice said. "She is very spirited. She screams quite loudly. Do you want to hear?" A sound cut through the speaker that made my knees buckle. It was a muffled scream of pure agony. It was the sound of my little girl in pain. "Stop it!" I growled, gripping Reggie's arm to stay upright. "What do you want?" The voice chuckled. "We want what Justin owes us plus a convenience fee. We want the company. Justin tells us you hold the physical stock certificates. Bring them to us and you get your daughter back. Refuse and we will bury her in the desert. You have 1 hour. Come to the old textile factory on the river. Come alone. If we see police, she dies." The line went dead. I stood there on the busy sidewalk while the city moved around me. Cars honked. People talked on their phones. The sun was shining, but my world had gone gray. I looked at Reggie. He was pale. "You cannot go, Clarence," he said. "They will kill you both. You need to call the FBI. We have the evidence on the tablet. Let them handle it." I shook my head. "The FBI takes hours to mobilize. The cartel takes minutes to execute. If I call the feds, Keisha is dead before they even load the tactical gear." I thought about the text message I had read on the tablet. I thought about Keisha asking Justin if I was dead yet. I thought about her impatience for my demise. She wanted me gone. She had betrayed me in the deepest way a child can betray a parent. A part of me, the cold logical part, said she made her bed, let her lie in it. She chose this life. She chose that husband. She chose greed over blood. But then I remembered holding her when she was a baby. I remembered her first steps in the kitchen of our first apartment. I remembered Odessa making me promise on her deathbed to always look out for our girl because she was weak and the world was hard. Odessa would not care about the betrayal. A mother's love does not keep score. If I let them kill her, I would be no better than Justin. I would be trading a life for money. I was not that man. I was Clarence Jefferson, and I protected what was mine, even when it did not deserve protection. I looked at Reggie. "Give me the keys to your car," I said. "Clarence, do not do this," Reggie pleaded, stepping in front of me. "You are walking into a slaughter. You are 72 years old. You cannot fight an army." "I am not going to fight them, Reggie," I said, holding out my hand. "I am going to make a trade. Give me the keys." Reggie looked into my eyes and saw that there was no moving me. He sighed and dropped the keys into my palm. "God help you, old friend," he whispered. I got into Reggie's sedan and put the briefcase containing the stock certificates on the passenger seat. Those papers represented 50 years of sweat, blood, and sacrifice. They were my legacy. They were Zuri's future. And I was about to hand them over to murderers to save a woman who wanted me dead. It was the hardest decision I had ever made. I started the engine and pointed the car toward the river district. I was going to the meet. I was going to look the devil in the eye. And I was going to see if I could make a deal that did not end with my family in the ground. The old textile factory sat on the edge of the river like a rotting tooth in a dead mouth. The windows were jagged holes of darkness, and the wind whistled through the rusted corrugated steel roof. I parked Reggie's sedan 100 yards out and walked the rest of the way with the leather briefcase gripping my hand like a lifeline. The gravel crunched under my dress shoes, sounding like bones breaking in the silence. I pushed open the heavy sliding door and stepped into the cavernous main floor where the looms used to thunder 50 years ago. Now the only thunder was the beating of my own heart. In the center of the floor, illuminated by portable floodlights, stood a folding table. Behind it sat a man I recognized only from FBI most wanted posters. It was Varga. He was eating an apple with a knife, looking as calm as if he were at a picnic. To his left, my daughter Keisha was tied to a steel support beam. Her face was bruised and her designer dress was torn and covered in grime. She looked up when she saw me, and her eyes widened with a mixture of hope and shame. To Varga's right was Justin. He was on his knees, his hands zip-tied behind his back. He looked like he had been dragged through hell. His face was swollen and he was weeping openly, snot and tears mixing on his chin. He looked up at me not with gratitude but with greedy expectation. "You brought it," Justin screamed, his voice cracking. "Give it to them, Clarence. Give them the company so we can go home." Varga stood up and wiped the apple slice on his sleeve. "Mr. Jefferson," he said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "You are a punctual man. I respect that. Do you have the certificates?" I walked forward, stopping 10 feet from the table. I looked at Keisha. "I am sorry, Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I am so sorry." I did not look at Justin. I placed the briefcase on the table. "I want my daughter," I said. "Let her go and you can open the case." Varga nodded to one of his men. The guard pulled a knife and cut the ropes binding Keisha. She fell forward, catching herself on her hands and knees, sobbing. She crawled toward me, grabbing my leg like a drowning woman. I did not reach down to comfort her. I kept my eyes on Varga. "Open it," Varga said. I clicked the latches. The sound was sharp and loud. I lifted the lid. Inside, there were no stock certificates. There were no bearer bonds. There was only a thick stack of printed spreadsheets and bank statements highlighted in neon yellow. Justin craned his neck to see. "What is that?" he shrieked. "Where are the stocks?" "You are trying to get us killed, old man." Varga looked into the case, then looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "This is not payment, Mr. Jefferson." "No," I said, my voice steady and cold. "It is not payment, it is an audit." I reached into the case and pulled out the top sheet. I turned it toward Varga. "You think Justin owes you $5 million because he is a bad gambler," I said. "You think he lost your money on crypto and bad real estate deals. But you are wrong. Justin is not just a loser, he is a thief." Justin's face went white. "Shut up," he screamed. "Shut up, he is lying. He is senile. Shoot him. I ignored him. I pointed to the highlighted columns. Look at the dates, Varga. Every time you transferred money into the shell company for washing. Justin skimmed 20% off the top before he made his investments. He did not lose $5 million. He stole $5 million. He moved it to a private account in the Cayman Islands under the name of his mistress. He has been stealing from you for 2 years. Varga snatched the paper from my hand. He scanned the numbers, his eyes moving fast. He signaled to another man who brought over a laptop. Check these routing numbers, Varga ordered. Justin was hyperventilating now, rocking back and forth on his knees. It is a lie, he babbled. The old man forged them. He is trying to frame me. I am loyal. I am your partner. The man at the laptop typed furiously for a minute, then looked up. It matches, boss. The transaction IDs align with our missing operational costs. He moved the funds to a secure server in Grand Cayman 12 minutes after every drop. The balance is sitting there right now, $5.2 million. The silence that fell over the factory was heavier than lead. Varga looked at Justin. It was not a look of anger. It was the look a butcher gives a pig before the slaughter. Justin stopped crying. He stopped breathing. He looked at me, and he realized that I had not come to save him. I had come to deliver him. You stole from me, Varga said softly, walking around the table. You stole from my family. And then you tried to blame it on the market. You tried to blame it on this old man. No, please. Justin begged, trying to shuffle backward on his knees. I can explain. I was holding it for safekeeping. I was going to give it back. Varga did not listen. He looked at me. Mr. Jefferson, you have done me a service. You cleaned my house. I closed the briefcase. We are done here, I said. I am taking my daughter. Varga nodded once. Take her. The debt is settled. I reached down and pulled Keisha to her feet. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. She looked at Justin. He was looking at her, his eyes pleading. Keisha, help me, he whimpered. Tell them we are partners. Keisha looked at her husband. She looked at the man who had planned my death. She looked at the man who had thrown her to the wolves to save himself. And for the first time in her life, she made a smart decision. She turned her back on him. She grabbed my arm and buried her face in my shoulder. We walked toward the door. My back was to them, but my ears were straining. I heard Justin start to scream a high, thin sound of pure terror. No, wait, I can get you the stocks. Just give me an hour. Do not look back, I whispered to Keisha. Keep walking. We reached the heavy sliding door. The cold night air hit my face. Behind us, inside the factory, a single gunshot rang out. It was loud and final, followed by the sound of a heavy body hitting the concrete floor. Keisha flinched violently, letting out a small cry, but she did not stop moving. I walked her to the car and opened the passenger door. She collapsed into the seat, pulling her knees to her chest. I walked around to the driver's side. I paused for a second, looking back at the factory. The lights were being turned off one by one. Justice had been served. It was not the justice of a courtroom, and it was not the justice of a prayer. It was the justice of the street. Justin had played a game he did not understand, and he had lost the only chip he had left. I got into the car and started the engine. I did not feel happy. I did not feel triumphant. I felt heavy. I had just signed a man's death warrant. But then I looked at my daughter shivering in the seat beside me, and I knew I would do it again. I drove away from the river, leaving the silence behind us. The nightmare was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. The drive back to the estate was the longest 10 miles of my life. The silence in the car was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of Keisha's ragged breathing and the hum of the tires on the asphalt. I pulled through the broken front gate, the one my truckers had smashed through only hours before, and parked in front of the house that I had built with my own hands. The lights were still on inside, casting long shadows across the lawn that looked like ghosts waiting to welcome us home. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I was exhausted in a way that sleep could not fix. I had fought a war in the span of 24 hours, and I had won, but the cost was sitting in the passenger seat beside me. Keisha opened the door and stumbled out, her legs barely holding her weight. She looked at the mansion as if it were a sanctuary, a place where the horrors of the textile factory could not touch her. She thought the nightmare was over. She thought that because I had saved her life, I had forgiven her sins. She was wrong. We walked into the grand foyer, our footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The house smelled of expensive candles and betrayal. As soon as the heavy front door clicked shut, Keisha collapsed. She fell to her knees, grabbing the hem of my jacket, weeping with the intensity that would have moved a lesser man. "Daddy, I am so sorry," she wailed, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes that looked so much like her mother's. "You have to believe me. It was all Justin. He is a monster. He threatened me. He told me that if I did not help him, he would hurt Zuri. He controlled everything, Daddy. I was a prisoner in my own home. I wanted to tell you. I wanted to warn you, but I was so scared. Please, you have to forgive me. I am your little girl. Mommy would not want us to be fighting like this." I looked down at her. I watched the performance. It was impressive. She was channeling every ounce of fear and relief into a narrative that painted her as the victim. She was trying to rewrite history before the ink was even dry. She wanted to be the damsel in distress who had been rescued by her heroic father. She wanted to go back to the brunches and the shopping sprees and the easy life, pretending that she had not been an active participant in my attempted murder. It was a desperate, clawing attempt to salvage her future, and for a split second, a microscopic part of my heart wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that my daughter was just weak, not evil. I wanted to believe that she had been coerced, but then I remembered the tablet in my pocket. I remembered the cold digital text on the screen. I remembered the impatience in her messages. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the black device. I did not speak. I did not offer her a hand to stand up. I simply walked over to the side table where the central audio system controls were located. I connected the tablet via Bluetooth. The speakers throughout the lower floor beeped as they synced. Keisha stopped crying. She looked at me confused, wiping a smear of dirt from her cheek. "Daddy, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am listening to the truth I said." I pressed play on the audio file I had extracted from her voice notes and phone calls, the ones Justin had recorded for insurance, the ones that were now her condemnation. Her voice filled the foyer, amplified and crystal clear, stripping away every lie she had just told. "Is he dead yet?" the recording boomed. The voice was annoyed, impatient. It was not the voice of a scared victim. It was the voice of a predator. "Why is the poison taking so long, Justin? I cannot wait another month. I have debts too. Just push him down the stairs and call it an accident. I do not care how you do it. Just get it done. I have waited 35 years for him to die so I can finally live. I am sick of pretending to love that old man. I am sick of his stories. I want my money." The silence that followed the recording was absolute. It was heavier than the silence in the factory. Keisha froze on the floor. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue. She could not deny it. That was her voice. That was her cadence. Those were her words, spoken not under duress, but with malice. The evidence hung in the air between us, a toxic cloud that suffocated her excuses. She looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. The mask had shattered, and underneath was a stranger I did not recognize. "You said you were scared," I said, my voice low and steady. "You said he forced you." "But that recording does not sound like fear, Keisha. It sounds like hate. It sounds like greed. You were not a hostage. You were a partner. You wanted me dead, not because you were threatened, but because I was taking too long to die naturally. You wanted the inheritance more than you wanted your father." Keisha sobbed, but it was a quiet, defeated sound now. "Daddy, please," she whispered. "I was angry. I did not mean it. It was just talk." "No," I said. "It was not talk. It was a plan. And tonight I watched a man die because of that plan." I walked over to her and looked down. I felt a profound sense of loss, like a limb had been amputated without anesthesia. I had saved her life tonight because I made a promise to her mother. I had paid her debt in blood. But that was the last check I would ever write for her. "I saved you because you carry Odessa's blood," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I saved you because I could not let them bury you in the desert. But the daughter I raised died a long time ago. You killed her, Keisha. You killed her with your greed and your entitlement. You are alive, but you are dead to me. There is no coming back from this. There is no forgiveness for wanting your own father in a grave so you can buy more shoes." Keisha looked up, panic setting in as the reality of my words hit her. "Daddy, no," she begged, reaching for my leg. "You cannot mean that. Where will I go? I have nothing. This is my house." "Not anymore," I said. I stepped back out of her reach. "This house belongs to the trust. It belongs to Zuri. You are trespassing." I walked to the massive front door and threw it open. The night air rushed in cold and cleansing. I pointed to the darkness outside. "Get out," I said. Keisha stared at the open door. "But I have no money," she cried. "I have no car. My cards are frozen. I only have these clothes." "Then you have more than I had when I started," I told her. "I built this empire from nothing. You have a lifetime of education and advantages that I paid for. Use them, figure it out, but do it somewhere else. You are not welcome here. You will not see Zuri. You will not see a dime of my money. You are on your own." She stood up slowly, realizing that the well had finally run dry. She looked around the foyer one last time at the chandelier, at the art, at the life she had felt entitled to. Then she looked at me. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to curse me, perhaps to beg again, but she saw the stone in my eyes and decided against it. She turned and walked out the door, her torn designer dress trailing on the ground, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone of the porch. I watched her walk down the long driveway, a small, lonely figure, disappearing into the shadows of the streetlights. I did not feel triumph. I felt a hollow ache in my chest. But as I watched her go, I also felt the weight lifting. The leech was gone. The poison was purged. I closed the heavy door and locked it. I turned the deadbolt with a definitive click. I was alone in the big, empty house, but for the first time in years, I felt safe. I turned off the lights in the foyer and walked toward the stairs. I had a granddaughter to raise and a company to rebuild. The mourning period was over. It was time to get back to work. The sun rose over a city that felt cleaner than it had the day before. I sat in the office of Reggie Banks watching the morning news on the flat screen mounted on the mahogany wall. The headline story was the raid on the clinic of Dr. Hoffman. Federal agents were shown carrying boxes of files out the front door while Hoffman himself was led away in handcuffs covering his face with a jacket. He had lost his medical license at 8 that morning, and by noon he would be facing charges for medical fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and distributing controlled substances. He looked small and pathetic, stripped of his white coat and his arrogance. Reggie turned off the TV and slid a thick file across the desk to me. "That closes the loop on the medical side," Reggie said. "Hoffman gave a full confession in exchange for a plea deal that keeps him off death row, but he will die in prison regardless. He sang like a bird about the fake dementia diagnosis and the lethal injection kit he had prepared for your birthday." I nodded, pushing the file aside. I did not need to read the details. I lived them. "And the other matter?" I asked. Reggie paused. He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "The police have suspended the search for Justin Mason. His car was found abandoned near the state line, but there has been no activity on his accounts and no sightings. The official theory is that he fled the country to avoid the debt collectors." Reggie looked me in the eye. "But we know the debt was collected. A John Doe was found in the marshlands 2 counties over this morning. No identification, no fingerprints, but the dental records will likely match. Varga is a man of his word. The case is effectively closed, Clarence. Justin is gone." I felt no joy at the news. I felt a cold finality. Justin had gambled with his life, and he had lost. He was a ghost now, a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition outstrips ability. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city I had helped build. The legal war was over. The threats were neutralized, but I still had a house full of ghosts to deal with. I drove back to the estate one last time, not to live there, but to say goodbye. The mansion sat on the hill, looking majestic and hollow. I walked through the empty rooms where my daughter had plotted my death and my son-in-law had terrorized my granddaughter. I felt nothing but a chill. This place was not a home. It was a monument to ego. It was a trap that had caught my family and destroyed it. I called the most aggressive real estate broker in the city. "Sell it," I told her, standing in the grand foyer. "I do not care about the price. Sell it furnished, sell it today. I want to be out by sundown." She tried to argue about market value and staging, but I cut her off. "Get it done." I packed the few things that mattered into Old Betsy. Odessa's photo albums, my first set of tools, Zuri's toys. I left the imported furniture and the crystal chandeliers and the silk drapes. I left the bad memories in the drywall. I drove Zuri to the south side of town to a neighborhood that the developers had not touched yet. We pulled up to a small brick bungalow with a porch swing and a big oak tree in the front yard. It was the house I had bought for Odessa when I made my first $10,000. I had rented it out for years, never having the heart to sell it. The tenants had moved out last month and it was empty. I unlocked the front door and the smell hit me. It smelled like floor wax and old timber. It smelled like safety. It was small. It only had 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. But when I walked into the kitchen, I could almost see Odessa standing by the stove humming a gospel song. Zuri walked in holding her stuffed bear. "It is small, Grandpa," she said, looking around. "Yes, it is," I said, kneeling down to her level. "But it is ours. And the walls are solid. And nobody here will ever hurt you. We are going to start over, Zuri. We are going to live a real life here." She looked at the fireplace where I used to dry my boots after a long haul. She looked at the window seat where her mother used to read books before she forgot who she was. Zuri smiled a small, genuine smile. "I like it," she said. "It feels warm." 2 days later, we stood in family court. The room was quiet and respectful, unlike the circus of the criminal trial. The judge was a woman with kind eyes who had read every page of the report filed by social services. She looked at the empty table where the parents should have been. Keisha had not shown up to contest the petition. She was somewhere in the wind working a double shift at a diner, learning the hard way what $1 was worth. Justin was in a drawer at the morgue waiting for a state burial. The judge looked at me. "Mr. Jefferson, you understand that at 72 years old, taking on the permanent guardianship of a minor is a significant commitment." I stood up straight, my back stiff. "Your Honor, I have raised a company from nothing. I have survived wars and recessions. I have plenty of fight left in me. And there is no one on this earth who will love that girl more than I do. She is my blood. She is my second chance." The judge smiled and banged the gavel. "Petition granted. Sole legal and physical custody is awarded to Clarence Jefferson. Zuri is yours, Mr. Jefferson. Take her home." We walked out of the courthouse hand in hand. The sun was shining and the air felt lighter. We sat on a bench in the park eating ice cream cones, watching the pigeons fight over crumbs. Zuri was quiet for a long time, licking her chocolate scoop. Then she looked up at me with those big eyes that saw too much. "Grandpa," she asked, her voice serious, "where are Mommy and Daddy really? Are they coming back?" I stopped eating. I wiped my mouth with a napkin. I could have lied. I could have told her they were on a trip or that they were sick. I could have protected her from the ugly truth a little longer. But lies were what got us here. Lies were the poison that had almost killed us. I looked at my granddaughter. She was strong. She had saved my life with a whisper. She deserved the respect of the truth. "They are not coming back, Zuri," I said gently. "Your father made some very bad choices. He hurt people, and he had to pay for those choices. He is gone. And your mother, she forgot what it means to be a family. She chose money over us, so she has to go away and learn how to be a person again." Zuri looked down at her shoes. "Did they love me?" she asked. I put my arm around her, pulling her close. "They loved you in their own way, baby girl," I said. "But they were sick. They were sick with greed. And sometimes when people get that sick, they cannot love anyone properly, not even themselves. But that is not your fault. And it is over now. You are safe. You are with me. And we are going to be okay." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Okay, Grandpa," she said. "I love you. I love you too, little bit," I said. I kissed the top of her head. We sat there for a long time watching the world go by. We were 2 survivors of a shipwreck sitting on the shore of a new life. I did not have my mansion. I did not have my daughter. But I had my dignity, and I had my granddaughter. And looking at the future through her eyes, I knew that was more than enough. The order had been restored. The ledger was balanced. And Clarence Jefferson was back in the driver's seat, ready for the long haul home. 10 years is a blink of an eye when you are young, but it is a lifetime when you are 82. I sat on the porch of the brick bungalow, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. My knees ached when it rained, and my hands shook a little when I held a coffee cup, but my mind was as sharp as a fresh razor. A cloud of dust kicked up at the end of the driveway, and the deep rumble of a V8 engine filled the air. It was old Betsy. She looked better than the day I bought her in 1985. The rust was gone, replaced by cherry red paint that shone like wet glass. The driver door opened and a young woman stepped out. It was Zuri. She was 17 years old now, and she was a force of nature. She wore a sharp blazer over her jeans and carried a leather portfolio under her arm. She was not the terrified little girl I had pulled out of a linen closet. She was the valedictorian of her high school class and the youngest member of the board of directors for the Odessa Alliance, our nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of financial elder abuse. She walked up the steps with a stride that demanded respect. She had my chin and Odessa's eyes. She sat down next to me and opened the portfolio. "We funded 3 more cases today, Grandpa," she said, her voice clear and confident. "We stopped a son from stealing his mother's pension in Detroit, and we helped a grandmother in Atlanta get her deed back. And I finished my application essays for Wharton." I told them I do not want to learn how to make money. I want to learn how to protect it. I looked at her with a pride that felt big enough to burst my chest. She had taken the trauma of her childhood and forged it into armor. She handled million-dollar endowments with the same steady hand I used to shift gears on a mountain pass. She was tough, but she was kind. She was everything her parents never were. "You are doing good work, little bit," I said, patting her hand. "Your grandmother would be smiling down on you." Zuri smiled, but her eyes drifted past me toward the street. She seemed distracted. "I saw her earlier," she said quietly. I did not have to ask who. The town was small enough that ghosts were bound to cross paths eventually. "Keisha," where I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "She was at the grocery store," Zuri said. "She is working as the shift manager at the diner on 4th Street now." I saw her name tag. She looked tired, old. She saw me too, Grandpa. She stopped stocking the shelves and just stood there. She didn't come over. She didn't try to talk to me. She just looked at me for a minute and then went back to work. I nodded slowly. I had kept tabs on Keisha for the last decade, though I never told Zuri. I knew she lived in a studio apartment above a garage. I knew she took the bus to work. I knew she had not dated anyone since Justin. She had hit rock bottom and stayed there clawing out a living 1 tip at a time. She had never asked for help, not once. That was the only thing that gave me a shred of respect for her. She had accepted her sentence. "Does she know you are graduating next week?" I asked. Zuri shrugged. "Everyone knows. It is in the paper. Do you think I should let her see me?" This was the conversation I had been dreading and preparing for. It was the final test. I leaned forward in my rocking chair. "That is not my decision to make, Zuri," I said. "But I will tell you this. There is a difference between an open door and a window. You can let someone look in without letting them come inside." Zuri thought about that for a long time. Finally, she pulled a single invitation from her portfolio. "I want to give this to her," she said, "just to attend. Not to talk, not to take pictures, just to see that I made it." I drove her to the diner the next morning. We sat in the truck watching through the window. Keisha was wiping down tables wearing a grease-stained apron. Her hair was gray and pulled back tight. She looked hard. She looked like a woman who knew the price of $1. Zuri got out and walked into the diner. I watched Keisha freeze. She looked at her daughter not with greed, but with a profound sadness. Zuri placed the envelope on the counter. They spoke for less than 2 minutes. There were no hugs. There were no tears. Just words. Zuri walked out and got back in the truck. "What did she say?" I asked. "She said thank you," Zuri replied, staring straight ahead. "She said she didn't deserve it. She said she would sit in the back and she promised she wouldn't embarrass me. And Grandpa, she tried to give me $20. She said it was for a graduation gift." "Did you take it?" I asked. "No," Zuri said. "I told her to keep it. I told her I have everything I need." On graduation day, the stadium was packed. I sat in the front row in my Sunday best. When they called Zuri's name, she walked across the stage like a queen. I clapped until my hands hurt. As she walked back to her seat, she looked up into the nosebleed section, the furthest seats from the stage. I followed her gaze. Keisha was there sitting alone in the shadows. She was wearing a simple dress that looked 10 years old. She was clapping too. She didn't try to wave, she didn't try to get close. She watched her daughter receive the diploma she had tried to steal, and then she stood up and left before the ceremony was even over. We met Zuri by the gate. She looked at the empty spot where Keisha had been. "She is gone," Zuri said. "Good," I said. "That means she kept her promise. That means she finally learned respect." Zuri looked at me, her eyes wet. "Is it wrong that I don't hate her anymore, Grandpa? I don't love her. I don't miss her. I feel sorry for her." "That is not wrong." "Baby girl," I said, putting my arm around her shoulders. "That is called growth. Hate is heavy. It takes energy to carry it. Pity is light. You can drop it whenever you want. You forgave her today, Zuri. Not for her sake, but for yours. You acknowledged she exists and you walked away. That is the ultimate victory. You didn't let the past poison your future. We walked to the truck, leaving the stadium behind. The sun was shining on Zuri's face and she looked free, truly free. The cycle was broken. The curse was lifted. We had won the war and we had won the peace. And as I watched my granddaughter drive us home, I knew that the Jefferson legacy was finally in safe hands. The leather cover of my journal felt cool and cracked under my fingertips like the skin of my own hands as I picked up my fountain pen one last time to write the final entry in the logbook of Clarence Jefferson. I did not write about the millions I had made, or the trucks I had bought, or the enemies I had buried. I wrote about the miles I traveled and the storms I weathered, but mostly I wrote about the girl who saved me from drowning in my own success. The door to my study opened, and Zuri walked in, holding the transfer documents that would seal the fate of Jefferson Logistics forever. She did not look like a teenager anymore. She looked like a CEO in training, wearing a blazer that fit her shoulders and a look of determination that fit her soul. She placed the papers on the desk next to my journal. "The board approved the transition, Grandpa," she said, her voice steady and devoid of fear. "I am officially the interim chairperson until I finish my degree. I checked the bylaws you added about the oversight committee. You gave the board the power to fire me if I fail to meet the ethical standards of the company." I looked at her and nodded slowly. "That is right," I said, capping my pen. "I did not do that because I do not trust you, Zuri. I did it because absolute power is a poison that no one is immune to, not even you. I want you to have people watching you. I want you to have to answer for your decisions. That is how you stay sharp, and that is how you stay honest. Justin and your mother never had anyone to answer to, and that is why they thought they were gods until they realized they were just food for wolves." Zuri picked up the pen I had set down. It was heavy, solid gold and older than she was. She signed her name on the bottom line next to mine. Her signature was elegant and strong, not a forgery like her father's, but a promise made in ink. She was taking the weight of the empire onto her shoulders, but unlike her parents, she was building the muscles to carry it. I watched her sign her name, and I felt the final weight lift off my shoulders, leaving me lighter than I had been in 40 years. People always ask me how I survived the betrayal of my own blood. They ask me how I kept my sanity when my daughter tried to kill me for a payout and my son-in-law sold me to the mob. The answer is simple, but it is hard to swallow. I learned that money is a magnifying glass. It does not change who you are, it just reveals it. If you are a good person, money makes you better because you can help more people and build bigger tables. But if you are broken, money just makes the cracks bigger until you shatter. Justin and Keisha thought money was the destination. They thought if they had enough zeros in their bank account, they would finally be happy and powerful and safe. They did not understand that money is just fuel. It is gasoline. You can put it in a truck and use it to build a nation, or you can pour it on yourself and light a match. I looked around my small study in the bungalow. It was not filled with expensive art or imported rugs. It was filled with pictures of my drivers and certificates of appreciation from the community and drawings Zuri had made when she was 8. This was real wealth. I thought about the men and women watching my story, the people who work double shifts to put food on the table, the people who drive old cars because they are saving for their kids' tuition. You are the rich ones. You have the struggle, and the struggle is what gives you value. Do not envy the people in the glass towers, because you do not know what they had to sell to get there. I kept my soul because I was willing to lose my fortune. I kept my family because I was willing to cut off the rot. It is a hard lesson, but it is the only one that matters. Money is a wonderful servant, but it is a terrible master. If you serve it, you will die a slave, no matter how much you own. Zuri left the room to file the papers, and I was left alone in the quiet of the bungalow. The afternoon sun was streaming through the sheer curtains, painting squares of gold on the hardwood floor. I walked over to the record player in the corner. It was a vintage turntable I had bought in 1972 with my first big paycheck. I pulled a vinyl record from the shelf. It was John Coltrane. It was the album Odessa used to play on Sunday mornings while she cooked breakfast and the house smelled of bacon and coffee. I handled the record with care, blowing the dust off the grooves before placing it on the spindle. I lowered the needle, and the soft crackle of the static filled the room, followed by the smooth, mournful cry of the saxophone. I walked back to my desk and closed the journal. I ran my hand over the cover one last time, feeling the texture of my life story under my palm. I stood up, my knees popping, and walked over to my old leather armchair, the one with the worn armrests that fit my elbows perfectly. I sat down and let my head fall back against the cushion. I was tired. It was a good kind of tired, the kind you feel after a long haul when the engine is finally off and the logbook is signed. I closed my eyes and listened to the music. I could almost feel Odessa sitting in the chair next to me, her hand resting on my arm. I could hear the distant rumble of a diesel engine on the highway, a sound that used to mean work, but now meant legacy. I smiled a small, genuine smile that started in my chest and warmed my face. I had won. I had not just beaten the bad guys, I had saved the good ones. I had protected the line. The house was quiet. The books were balanced. The truck was parked. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of old paper and peace. The screen of my life began to fade to black, but I was not afraid of the dark anymore. I had Zuri. I had the truth. And for the first time in a long time, Clarence Jefferson was finally free to rest. This harrowing journey taught me that blood makes you related, but only loyalty makes you family. My daughter and son-in-law worshipped money until it consumed their souls, proving that greed is the poorest form of poverty. I learned that true love sometimes requires the hardest boundaries, even if it means cutting off your own flesh and blood to protect the innocent. Real wealth isn't measured by the zeros in your bank account, but by the peace in your heart and the integrity of your legacy. Money can buy a house, but only character can build a home. If you believe that integrity is worth more than gold, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories where justice always finds a way.